From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien will talk about managing corn price risk, which was his topic at this week's Risk-Assessed Marketing Workshops hosted by K-State. And along with that, Dan will share his latest price probability projections for corn at harvest time this fall. Then K-State's Savanna Crossman will talk about her research on variable rate seeding of corn and soybeans and the individual field modeling required to make those systems work for the producer. She spoke on this subject at the recent Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference, co-hosted by K-State. And further ahead, to talk over Kansas agricultural weather with us, K-State's Mary Knapp, along with much more straight ahead on this Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Welcome once more. Well, our guest now has, again, been on the road this past week as he's been an active presenter at that series of 3 risk-assessed marketing workshops for crop producers put on by K-State Research and Extension in western Kansas. And so we will ask him about some of the prime things he was discussing with producers there. Dan O'Brien is a grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. As you know, he's along with us to talk grain trade trends each Friday right here. So these workshops are very well received year in and year out. And what were some of the main points that you were bringing up with producers there, Dan?
Well, it's surprising to me how much the crop insurance, particularly the revenue insurance programs, have to do with the ability to forward price grain, especially out in these western Kansas areas where we're dealing with, again, irrigated acreages, lots of bushels, and all manner of risks from hail to drought to tough years or whatever. So we were looking at crop insurance decisions in light of 2019 corn marketing decisions and put people in those workshops through the paces, I guess, would be polite to say, with regard to how they might manage the risks that they're probably very likely to face in this coming year.
So what mechanisms really stood out in as far as that risk management for, in particular, corn growers, you say?
Well, again, the first steps that we took were to look at their crop insurance choice. And front and center, you've got revenue protection coverage either with or without hail insurance, and comparing that to yield protection, which provides good coverage, but the loss determination mechanisms based completely on just the yield side, yield times a set price, and revenue protection with harvest price exclusion, which sets an early price, again, the February average for corn, but has no opportunity if prices should jump up in October to make any adjustment. And again, the big issue, and of course our colleague Art Barnaby made famous this terminology, the big issue is in a short crop year is the ability to replace bushels or bushel replacement. Again, if a person forward prices some particularly forward contracts, and then we have a tough production year and you're caught short in terms of revenue, then with a revenue protection tool, you're able to come in and provide what you're short on in terms of production to fill the contracts with monies to buy back those bushels at the market at that time. Without that, the nightmare scenario for ag producers is to be proactive in forward pricing in terms of what they think are good contracts, and then have a really rough year, be caught short of actual production, fulfill their contracts, and then have to buy back bushels at a high price market fill those contracts and really suffer financially because of it.
Not a position you want to be in as a producer, for sure. Well, as for the market action this week, the trades didn't break terribly hard either way for the most part. Well, in particular on the soybean side, but in general, what seems to have riveted the most attention, discussions with Chinese trade officials on the potential resolution of the tariff battle.
Well, there certainly are more positive rumors to that effect than we've had for a good while. Of course, the rumors, optimistic statements have all been kind of the stream of information that's played out in the ag press with regard to these. And I think that the press is kind of taking a show-me Missourian type of mode on this to really discount rumors and wait for actual agreements. But from all that's stated, again, from what I understand of the news, again, we'll be having discussions during the next several days with Chinese representatives in Washington talking to folks. And then I understand there are at least tentative plans for President Trump to go back to China and speak with President Xi. So this is all to the positive side. China, apparently, there are reports anyway that their economy has been affected negatively by these tariffs. And, of course, we in the United States for our ag products, we've seen that as well. So, these discussions are welcome. One of the things that catches my eye out of all that, Eric, is that one of the items on the table being offered by China is that they would be very aggressive buyers of certain of our ag products for the next several years. So that would all be to the good. There was some news in the last week about the shortness of Chinese production to meet domestic needs, and I'm not sure how that plays to affect the U.S. corn market, but it could be a factor. And I recall, of course, that they're ramping up domestic ethanol production, in essence, in a plan to use up their, quote, burgeoning, unquote, domestic stockpiles of corn. The thought that we've had is that, gosh, once they do that, eventually, sometime, they would eventually actually whittle down their stockpiles and find themselves in a position where they may need to import corn. Well, we were thinking that might happen. It'd be really surprising if it happened this soon. So we'll find out how all that plays. And I'm thinking that that positive news in the market, plus what we could find out over the next several weeks as the USDA rolls out what has been delayed export sales data, could be a positive, supportive thing for the market. Of course, we have dry conditions in South America for soybeans that could, if they persist, impact the corn market and grain sorghum and all manner of markets. So we have a number of things going on right now that provide some underlying optimism in terms of where markets might go from here through spring, and we'll have to see how it all works itself out.
Now, does that optimism resonate in your latest corn price probabilities? For that is part of the message that you shared at these risk-assessed marketing workshops, Dad.
Yes, we're a creature just like every other creature that gets involved with grain price forecasting, and that you're, quote, conservative. Mm-hmm. But it does seem like that a person's actual outlook out to the fall of 2019 with probabilities for low, medium, high scenarios probably leaning towards about a 20 to 25% chance of a major crop problem happening here in the U.S. or abroad that would give us markedly higher prices. Now, the scenario we laid out in these workshops was that combination of factors would take corn prices from about, on yesterday's close, $4 for D's corn, up about $1 to about $5 by harvest. The average scenario that we projected with an average crop, no major shortfalls or issues, was that the $4 corn we're seeing now in the D's 2019 contracts probably would, at harvest next year, end up with something along the lines of, say, $3.75. And probably, if there's a 20-25% chance of a high price, closer to $5, there's probably a 60% chance, 60 or 65% chance of a price in that, $3.75, $3.85 area. Again, that's not having a crop problem here in the U.S. and no game-changing issues taking place overseas. And that leaves, of course, the downside risk of 10-15% probability of, tremendous 180 bushel, 15 billion bushel corn crop and prices well, basically closer to $3 than they are to $3.50. So right now, as people look towards managing prices out off into the future, they have in mind that, gosh, the downside is out there as a possibility, but we're probably looking at something not too dissimilar with some downside harvest seasonality heading out off into October, November of next year. And what's so striking, though, is that there's a whole lot of things that could go wrong in that scenario. Mm-hmm. And we have not had any type of fall price tremendous strength since basically the middle of 2013 on to the present. So when you look at the probability of the price outcome in D's corn for 2019, do you only look at the probability within this year, which is 1 in 5, 1 in 4 of some type of short crop, or do you say, gosh, we have not had a problem since 2012, and does that affect the likelihood of such a problem in production happening in 2019? And if so, then it ups your expectation, or at least the risk of that type of short crop high price scenario happening this year.
More than a few variables to ponder, and briefly, Dan, we've yet to take up wheat, and really it's fairly tranquil, that market, although there have been some wonderings about the impact of the polar vortex on the winter wheat crop and whether any winter kill might ensue.
Yeah, that's certainly been a discussion in the market. We keep hearing of reports from Russia of having had a strong pace of wheat sales early, and the possibility of having to, I'm not sure if you call it ration sales or control sales or do something at the back end of their market here. So that's out there. Dry conditions in Western Australia, that's out there also. In the midst of all that, the International Grains Council came out, projected higher production for next year in the midst of a whole number of issues. Again, a lot to come to bring that to fruition. With all of that, we're sitting with July wheat on yesterday's close at $5.19, and that's not $3.50. It's not $4. It's not even $4.50. It's sitting at $5.19.
Mm-hmm. Well, producers keep up with Dan's rolling analysis of the grain markets online at agmanager.info. And once more, Dan, we appreciate the comments. We'll talk next Friday. Thank you.
Yes, take care, Eric. Thanks.
That from grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, Dan O'Brien, along with this from his office in Colby, Northwest Kansas. And this is Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today is back now on the K-State Radio Network. We'll feature for you now another of the presentations that was made at the Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference, recently co-hosted by K-State Research and Extension. Across the way is a graduate researcher in the Department of Agronomy, and she's spent some research time on variable rate seeding of corn and soybeans. Her name is Savanna Crossman. Savanna, welcome to you, first of all.
Thank you very much.
And tell us a bit about what started you into this research, into variable rate technologies and what that can do for producers of corn and soybeans.
Certainly. So I'm originally from Vermont and went to the University of Vermont for my degree in agronomy. And then love in the U.S. Army brought us to New York, which brought me to this variable rate seeding project. The farmers in New York were really struggling at the time. It was about 2014, because this was the time that they were all realizing that they had already bought into precision ag equipment, but they were lacking the research in New York on how to effectively use it to turn a profit. A lot of the models that they were currently using to predict seeding rate especially were based and developed in other states. And so when they tried to apply it on their field, they weren't seeing that economic benefit as promised. So this project really was the brainchild of a farmer. And We took it and we've been running with it ever since and still are today. And our overall goal is to develop field-specific models to predict which seeding rates will yield the most profit based on those field-specific properties like elevation and soil type and your fertility and that sort of thing.
So that is really your ultimate objective, and we'll get into that in a bit more depth here in just a second. But what is it that determines a variable rate prescription? What all goes into that?
Many different things can go into that, and that will vary company to company, whatever software package you're using, and it depends what region you're in. So, for example, in New York, we use elevation shows up a lot of having a lot of influence as a layer. But if you're in Kansas, that might not matter so much in certain areas. So what layers you select to create your variable rate prescription will change area to area. The ones that we look at in New York, as I mentioned, would be like elevation, your topography. Soil fertility is definitely showing up as a really big factor in a lot of fields, and you have to think about what kind of resolution is appropriate for your area. In New York, we are using half-acre grids, and in some fields that's not fine enough, where when I say that in Kansas, the farmers just about pass out. That's really fine. That's a lot of money.
Right.
So that might not be appropriate for here, but that's what we see in New York.
So you've actually, as part of this project, been trying to get a grip on how variable rate compares overall to flat seeding rates in regard to actual economic benefits of the two, right?
Right. Yes. So when we design our prescriptions, we put in 3 really important factors, and this has been a lesson learned when we design our prescriptions. We put in what our model is predicting, what seeding rate is going to do the best profit. And then we put in a couple passes of what the grower would have planted, flat rate. So that will change field to field. And then we also still include randomized seeding rates throughout the field in blocks. And those randomized rates allow us to take that data from a year that we were testing our model and put the randomized block data in to have our model learn for next year and become more refined for next year.
What did you discover in the way of trends? Can flat rates compete with variable rates or vice versa?
Yes. So the most important thing when you're building a variable rate prescription that we're finding is that you need multiple years of data, especially with the changing climates. You need to kind of be able to almost even it out. We have dry years, we have wet years, we have normal years. Multiple years of data is important, and also multiple years of model training is important. So the first year we tested was 2016, and we found about a 50-50 split. In half the fields, flat rate was equal to variable rate. But then every year we've been getting better, and so last year we shot about 75%. So in 75% of our tested acres, our variable rate was able to produce a higher profit per acre than our flat rate.
Significantly higher, or is that sort of statistically higher, making it worth one's while to look at variable rate?
Yes.
And the investment to returns would be favorable there. Now, you were working with both corn and soybeans in this research. Are there any differences in variable rate response by crop here, or were your results fairly consistent across both?
That's an excellent question. And I think that most people would assume we would see more responsiveness in corn, but we've actually seen that soybeans have more responsiveness to the variable rate populations.
And do you have reasons for that, or is that to be determined?
To be determined. It's just really interesting because people consider soybeans the great compensators, in that you can plant them at whatever rate and they'll make canopy and they'll be fine. But we're actually seeing that they are the ones that are giving us the most return on our investment.
Now, again, your work in New York, and it is field-specific, but you think the principles here could translate to Kansas conditions, as you're familiar with them?
I do think that the principles, such as our methodology, how we designed our experiment, how we collect our data, and the models that we're applying could easily be applied in Kansas. I don't think that you can take a model that was developed in New York and put it here. But I think that we can take that testing method and easily develop models that will work well in Kansas.
Size of field is one of the pivotal things here, though, and you noted the grid you're looking at, and those will change given the fact that we have considerably larger fields in the High Plains region, for instance. So that has to be worked into this, does it not?
Yes, so that would be part of it, is we find that field fertility, the soil fertility, does play a large factor, and I know that is still a factor in Kansas. But determining what resolution you really need, this is where we would, if you were to apply it in Kansas, we would need to most likely lean on the industry and ask them, have them show us what half acre picks up compared to 5 acre, which might be more typical, and then make a judgment call about which resolution would be appropriate for Kansas. And I know like EC data is another popular option, especially because it is so much cheaper than grid soil sampling. And we do find that, especially in New York, if we're deriving texture has a lot to do with our yield predictability.
Mm-hmm. You're continuing this work, though, Savanna, and what's your objective at this point? To reaffirm what you've discovered so far, or just keep building upon what you have to develop that longer-term analysis of variable rate?
So our objective is really twofold. One is to keep building. We want to expand. We want to reach more farms. We want to get our model out on the ground, large acreage. And then the second part of that is we will be charging a fee for this. And that's going to come back into our nonprofit and fund further precision ag research in New York that is all farmer-led and researcher-assisted. Mm-hmm. So that is the overall vision that we have for this model. It's sort of our seed money to get us going, to give more back to the farmers.
Very good. So the takeaway, once again, though, is that even as this matures, it will all boil down to field-specific modeling to make variable rate work. That's the conclusion to the moment?
To the moment, that's really what we're seeing. You really can't take what you've learned over there and apply it right here, even if they're right next to each other and on the surface they look exactly the same. What drives yield in those two fields could be totally different.
Well, interesting presentation on this at the CARTA conference recently. And again, you're studying in the Department of Agronomy now at K-State. What are your other research pursuits?
I'm currently working on a soil health by management project, which involved going out to western Kansas to the Keith Soil Series. And we were looking at all these different measurements of soil health. So you have many different ways of looking at soil health, but we don't really know which ones are valid, especially in the western Kansas context. And we're looking at soil health parameters by tillage, no tillage, and then comparing that to like a native section that has never been farmed. So that's what I'm doing currently.
And that's going to be a wealth of objectives to track down, because that's a pretty broad subject to take on.
Yeah, it's actually one of 11 sister projects across the U.S. It's being funded by the NRCS, because I think as a whole, ag is wondering about soil health and what is soil health really, and what can we actually measure, and can we pick up on management differences through soil health.
Well, as you continue to pursue that, we'd like to have you back, if we may, in the future and talk about what you're discovering in regard to soil health variables and how to manage them. For the here and now, thanks for a quick overview of your work on variable rate corn and soybean seeding, and we appreciate your time right here.
Thank you so much for having me.
She's Savanna Crossman, a graduate researcher in the K-State Department of Agronomy. She did talk about this topic at the recent Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference, and we'll be back in a moment on this, the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggle to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. While the official statement issued by the White House signaled that there were still sizable differences between the U.S. and China, President Trump believes a comprehensive deal will be struck with that nation. In a press briefing with Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, who led the talks for China, the president said that China had agreed to buy U.S. soybeans. Liu commented that the purchases would be 5 million metric tons per day, but the White House later clarified that it was just a total of 5 million metric tons overall. The Xinhua news agency said a statement from the Chinese delegation indicated that the discussions made important progress given the current stage of the talks, and the two sides had, quoting here, candid, specific, and fruitful discussions. The news agency also reported that China will substantially expand imports of agriculture, energy, industrial products, but the report did not indicate any tonnage or dollar amounts involved. The president said the extra purchases will include corn and wheat along with other products, but the details, of course, now remain a key. And efforts to help the U.S. agricultural sector hit by the negative impacts of the tariffs enacted by other countries, primarily China, continue at the USDA. The department announced it has awarded $200 million to 57 groups via the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program. This in a bid to help the sector mitigate the effects of unjustified trade retaliation against U.S. farmers and exporters, in the department's words. The effort is aimed at helping the organizations receiving the awards find new markets for a host of U.S. agricultural products. The USDA took applications from organizations from September through November and had originally planned on announcing the awards earlier in January. However, the partial U.S. government shutdown delayed that announcement until today. The ATP is part of a $12 billion package that the Trump administration announced previously to help the agricultural sector cope with the impacts of trade tariffs applied to U.S. products. The American Soybean Association, for one, was awarded $21.9 million out of that pot. 5 other organizations received awards of $10 million or more. The U.S. Meat Export Federation, $17.6 million. U.S. Grains Council, $13.9 million. The Food Export USA Northeast, $13.8 million. Food Export Association of the Midwest USA, $13.8 million as well. And the Southern U.S. Trade Association, $12.5 million. Secretary Sonny Perdue said in announcing the aid that the infusion will help develop other markets and move the U.S. away from being dependent on one large customer for our agricultural products. And a week from today, February 8th, is the date for the latest USDA World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimate, the first to be issued since December. Here's a look ahead from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
During the government shutdown, ag commodity traders went over a month without the usual scores of USDA reports, including the January USDA World Supply and Demand Forecast.
So I think the market's anxious to hear our evaluation of global supply and demand balances, so they can get a complete picture.
But USDA's Outlook Board Chairman Seth Meyer says that evaluation, February 8th, likely will not be a totally complete picture. Yes, that day the USDA Statistics Service will give analysts final figures for this past year's crops and an estimate of winter wheat seedings and grain stocks. But
the information that may be more lacking will be in the livestock and dairy sector.
For example, USDA's report on the cattle herd should have been out this week. That's now been pushed to February 28th. Nonetheless, Meyer says his analysts will use what livestock and crop data they have, foreign and domestic, and they'll issue a full report with export and price forecasts on the 8th. From now until then,
everybody here is scrambling to make sure we're putting out something which is timely, but also accurate for the information that we have.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Applications are now being taken for a college scholarship named for a true pioneer in the Kansas wheat industry. Marcia Boswell has the story of the wheat leader for whom it is named and the application process on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
Between sports, clubs, volunteering, studying for the ACT and SAT, part-time jobs, chores at home, and just plain homework, most Kansas high school seniors are working toward building foundations for their future. Soon the agricultural industry will need these vibrant young men and women to step up and take the reins for the future. For now, though, these students are making plans for college, and more importantly, how to pay for it. High school seniors pursuing careers in agriculture are encouraged to apply for the 2019 Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship. The Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship was established in 2009 to honor Herb Clutter's influential role in organizing leadership groups on behalf of Kansas wheat producers and is administered by the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. The scholarship fund will award one $500 scholarship per year to a college or university-bound incoming freshman from Kansas pursuing a career in the field of agriculture. To be eligible for the scholarship, applicants must plan to be a full-time student at any 2- or 4-year Kansas college or university. Recipients will be selected based on academic achievement, leadership qualities, and career objectives focused around the field of agriculture. Recipients will receive the scholarship to be applied toward tuition for the student's college or university education. The scholarship is non-renewable. According to Program Assistant for Kansas Wheat, Jordan Hildebrand, the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers is proud to support the young men and women who are the future of the wheat industry. She says we are looking for students who are passionate about agriculture and not only excel in the classroom, but also in their communities and extracurricular activities. The Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship was established through a fund in memory of Herbert W. Clutter, a farmer from Holcomb and the first president of the National Association of Wheat Growers, which was established in 1948. Clutter encouraged Kansas wheat farmers to organize as a strong, united voice, which led to the formation of the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers in 1952. He encouraged research in education and industrial uses of wheat, improved variety development, and methods to produce the best product at the lowest cost. Clutter's efforts led to the formation of the Kansas Wheat Commission by the Kansas Legislature in 1957. Applicants for the Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship must complete the scholarship application, which includes a 400 to 500-word essay discussing why they have chosen to pursue a career in agriculture. The scholarship and attached documents must be submitted to the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers by March 15, 2019. For more information about the Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship, please visit kansaswheat.org. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. Well, out with the deep freeze and in with the warmth. Mary Knapp talks Kansas weather with us next on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. This Agriculture Today closes out on Kansas agricultural weather. Along with us once more is climatologist Mary Knapp, K-State Research and Extension, over from the Weather Data Library here at the university. And it was the talk of the nation all week, Mary. Although Kansas didn't bear the full brunt of it, that polar vortex left its mark here in the state.
Right. We were on the western edge of that incursion of Arctic air, and that was noted by the fact that the coldest temperatures were in northeastern and east central Kansas. In Manhattan, we got down to -2. Not quite as cold as they got to our north. Marysville got down to a -10 on the 25th. And there are rumors floating around of a -16 in east central Kansas. We're trying to pin down exactly where that occurred. But again, pretty cold temperatures, and the coldest that we've seen in a while. Not quite so cold in the west. They were having lows in the single digits, but not sub-zero. And when you look at the month of January as a whole, it may surprise people, particularly in the east, that statewide we were above normal. Not a lot. We were only about a half a degree warmer than normal. But there was only one that fell below normal, and that was the northeast, not surprisingly. But it was only 0.4 of a degree cooler than normal. And again, when you're that close to normal, you really are within the expected range.
And just as a footnote here, the polar vortex, yes, unusual, but not unheard of.
No, there have been other events like this. And again, the big thing is being alert to when they do occur, the dangers that are inherent with them, because they were very dangerous temperatures. When you get your air temperatures in the minus 25 to minus 30 degree range and wind chills in the minus 50, doesn't take long for frostbite to occur. So again, it behooves people to be cautious in those conditions, but no, it isn't unprecedented.
And it is clearly on the way out now. We'll get into that in a second. But further on into your summary of January, the moisture side of it, what does that have to say?
January ended up being wetter than normal statewide. We averaged 99 hundredths of an inch, not quite an inch, but that was about 3/4 of an inch more than we typically see in January. And that translates into about 1 1/3 times our normal precipitation for the month of January. Not everybody was wetter than normal. The driest division was the Northwest, but they still saw an average of 36 hundredths of an inch, which was 80% of normal. The other one that didn't quite make it was the East Central. They averaged 85 hundredths of an inch, which was about 98% of normal. So again, not quite what they would expect, but certainly very, very close to the mark. And when you look at the September to the present, which was basically starting the winter wheat planting season, we're running above normal in all the divisions. So about 170% of normal for the precipitation for the wheat season so far.
We are sitting very well for soil moisture right now, and hopefully that'll set us up for a good start to the spring likewise. And in fact, Mary, as we look at the latest outlook, we may have a quick brush with springtime weather starting this weekend.
Right. Well, the weekend is expected to be extremely mild. There's a return of southerly flow, and that's going to bring temperatures up into the 50s and 60s. What's really interesting is in the Northeast, there is some expectation that the lows will stay very warm. We're talking lows above freezing. In fact, we may see lows in the 40s. That, again, is not particularly unusual, but we don't want multiple days like that. There's still a lot of winter left, and we don't want the vegetation to be breaking dormancy too rapidly.
And it's to be relatively dry over the weekend as well?
At this point, they're not looking for any moisture over the weekend. We are watching a series of storms that are coming onshore in California, but it will probably be mid to late week before that actually arrives in the central part of the U.S. And the question will be, does it go to our north and benefit the Dakotas and Nebraska, or go to our south and hit Texas and Oklahoma? We'd like it to at least brush Kansas. When we look at the 8 to 10 day precipitation outlook, it favors wetter than normal conditions for that time period. The QPF, the quantitative precip forecast, which we've mentioned before, has us dry through Thursday of next week. And in other words, we're not expecting more than 1/10 of an inch across the state. So we'll have to see how that plays out as we anticipate this next system.
And our warmer temperatures will give way just as quickly as they turned up, it sounds.
Right. The front will be moving fairly quickly, so after the warm air, we'll get another incursion of cold air. We're looking by midweek having our highs more in the seasonal range, actually probably a little bit colder than normal. Highs may be in the low 30s to upper 20s, lows in the teens. We're not looking at sub-zero readings for that, but it will be back to the seasonal range.
And just to drop this in quickly here, with our recent ice and snow cover, this possibility is probably faded from view, but in that it is drying out now, the chances for wildfire will amp up once again, and folks shouldn't lose sight of that.
Right. As we move into our spring season, we keep in mind that the vegetation that we have tends to dry very, very quickly It only takes a couple of hours to dry that fine field of grasses down. So you get these fronts through with a lot of wind, and it wouldn't take much to move a fire along very, very rapidly. Keep in mind also that the cold air can help dry those fields down as well. That tends to be very low humidity levels. So you can be surprised with the active fire behavior that can occur in those colder temperatures with those dry humidity levels.
And moreover, it's more difficult to battle wildfires when you have a dry fuel load and beneath the ground is still moist and hard to navigate.
Right. With that, the fuels are dry. The fire can move without any hindrance, but it can be very difficult for the firefighters to get around. So again, it behooves people to be cautious as you get out and start doing the spring cleanup activities. Keep in mind that fire danger is always present, and be alert for those conditions.
Get out and enjoy the weekend, Mary. Thanks for coming over.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension. And we appreciate you tuning in, hoping that you'll rejoin us right here on Monday, this same time. Until then, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.